The auctioneer called my farm dead before the first bid ever came. He stood on the flatbed trailer in his white hat, microphone in hand, smiling at the crowd like he was selling a joke instead of my life. "Folks," Graham Pike said, "you're looking at tired land. Dry soil, old fences, no production worth bragging about." A few men laughed. One of them was Landon Voss, the developer who wanted my acreage cheap enough to turn into storage units. I stood beside the barn with my hands tucked into my coat pockets so nobody could see them shaking. They thought the farm had nothing left. They had not seen the stone well behind the milk shed. They had not read my father's old water log. And they sure had not heard what happened when that forgotten well started filling buckets again. My name is Ruth Ann Calloway, and I had lived on Calloway Farm outside Caddo Ridge, Oklahoma, for 59 years, if you counted the seasons. My heart stayed there even when my body did not. The farm sat 3 miles past the last paved road, where red dirt rose in soft clouds behind every truck and wind pressed the grass flat before storms. We had 80 acres, one weather-beaten farmhouse, a milk shed with a roof that sagged like a tired shoulder, and a stone well behind it that most people forgot was there. I did not forget. I avoided it. That well had belonged to my father before it belonged to me. Amos Calloway dug the first ring by hand with 2 cousins and a mule team, then deepened it after the drought of 1965. He kept a water log in a green ledger, writing down depth, clarity, rainfall, and pump notes with the same care other men used for church records. When I was little, he would lift the wooden cover and let me listen. "Water talks soft," he'd say. "That's why foolish people miss it." After my husband, Ben, died, the farm got quieter in ways I did not know how to mend. The cattle went first, then the hay lease, then the tractor with the good hydraulics. I told myself each sale was temporary, just a bridge over one bad year. But bad years can learn to line up. By the time the county tax notice came, I had already borrowed against the south field, delayed repairs on the barn, and stopped answering calls from my daughter, May, when I knew she would ask direct questions. May lived in Tulsa and worked in billing at a hospital. Numbers did not scare her. My shame did. "Mom," she said one night, "how much do you owe?" Enough to be annoying. "That's not an amount, It's my amount." She went quiet. That was the thing about May. When she was angry, she got precise. When she was hurt, she got silent. I should have told her about the auction notice then. I should have told her about Landon Voss's letters offering to relieve me of an underperforming asset. I should have told her I still had Daddy's waterlog tucked in the pantry behind jars of peaches nobody had opened since Ben passed. Instead, I folded my fear into smaller pieces and kept working. Then Graham Pike's auction sign went up by the road. Estate land auction, Calloway Farm, dry acreage, development potential. Dry acreage. Those 2 words sat on my chest like stones. Because behind the milk shed, under a warped wooden cover and a mat of Johnson grass, the old well was not dead. It was waiting. Graham Pike came to inspect the farm on a Tuesday morning with boots too clean for auction work. He arrived in a white pickup with his name painted on both doors in gold letters. Pike Land and Auction, as if the truck itself expected applause. Landon Voss followed behind him in a dark gray SUV, the kind with windows black enough to make you wonder what it was hiding besides air conditioning. I met them by the barn. The wind had been blowing since dawn, dragging red dust across the yard and rattling the loose tin on the milk shed roof. Somewhere near the fence line, a meadowlark sang like it had not gotten the bad news yet. Graham shook my hand without really holding it. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "we'll do our best with what's here." That sounded kind until you heard the pity under it. Landon walked past me, already studying the land like a man measuring where to cut it apart. Road access is decent, he said. Power's close. Soil's not worth much, but that's not a problem for storage. My father grew wheat here, I said. Landon glanced at the dry field. Not lately. Graham made a small chuckle into his clipboard. I felt my face warm. They walked the barn, the equipment shed, the south field. Graham took pictures of cracked water troughs, leaning gates, rusted hinges, all the ugliest angles. He did not photograph the stone well behind the milk shed. The Johnson grass had hidden most of it, and I did not point it out. That was my mistake. Not because he deserved help, because truth does not protect itself just because it is true. At the back pasture, Graham stopped and looked toward the ridge. You understand, he said. Buyers will price this as distressed ground. Distressed doesn't mean dead. He smiled like I had said something charming. Course not, but auction language needs to be realistic. Landon slipped his sunglasses down his nose. Ruth, I can save you the embarrassment of a public sale. My offer still stands. You mean the offer that wouldn't pay the tax bill and the banknote both? It pays you something before the market tells you worse. There it was. Soft voice, hard knife. I looked toward the milk shed. The warped wooden well cover sat in shadow, gray and quiet. My father's green ledger was still in the pantry. I could have taken them there. I could have shown the depth records, the old water notes, the county stamp from 1972 that marked the well as reliable even in dry years. Instead, shame closed my throat. I'll take my chances at auction, I said. Graham clicked his pen. Suit yourself, but don't expect miracles out of tired land. When they drove away, dust swallowed their taillights. Behind the milk shed, the old well waited without complaint. That almost made it worse. The next morning, I drove to the county records office with my father's green ledger wrapped in a dish towel. It was a foolish way to carry proof. Maybe, but the ledger felt less like paperwork than bone. The cover was cracked near the spine. The pages smelled faintly of dust, pencil lead, and the pantry where it had slept behind peach jars for too many years. Caddo County kept old water files in a side room behind the assessor's desk. A woman named Patrice, who had known my husband from high school, looked at the ledger and then at me over her glasses. Ruth Ann, what are you hunting? Proof that the old wells still registered. Her eyebrows rose for the auction. I looked down. That answered her. She softened her voice. You should have come sooner. I know. There was no use dressing that up. Patrice pulled microfilm scans, parcel cards, and a brittle folder labeled Callaway Domestic/Agricultural Well, 1972. Inside was a typed report from a county water technician showing depth, casing, yield estimate, and a note that made my throat tighten. Reliable draw during low rainfall periods, hand-dug origin, family maintained. Daddy would have liked that. I asked for certified copies. Patrice made them. But when I asked if the auction listing could be changed, she shook her head. County can't alter private auction language. You'd have to notify Pike Land and Auction and interested bidders yourself. I called Graham yesterday. And he said old wells are liabilities unless tested. Patrice sighed. He's not wrong about needing a test. That was the problem with unfair people. Sometimes they hid behind one true thing. By noon, I had called 2 water testing companies. One was booked until next week. The other said they could come Friday, the same day as the public preview. if I paid a rush fee that made my checking account feel thin. I said yes. Then I called May. She answered on the second ring. Mom. Just that one word, and I nearly lost my nerve. The auction notice is real, I said. Silence. Then, controlled and sharp, when were you going to tell me? Before the sale. That's not funny. I wasn't making a joke. No, you were making a wall. I sat in my truck outside the courthouse, watching rain clouds build over the water tower. My hands were cold around the phone. I was ashamed. May's breath caught. She had expected stubbornness. Not that. Mom, I thought if I could fix it before you knew, then it wouldn't count as failing. Her voice changed then, softer, but not easy. You don't get to protect me by disappearing inside a problem. The words hurt because they were true. I looked at the certified well report on the passenger seat. I need help Friday. May did not answer right away. Then she said, I'll be there. For the first time in months, I let someone carry part of the weight before it crushed me. Friday came in hot and windless. That was almost worse than heat with wind. At least wind makes a person feel like the world is still trying. This air just sat on Callaway Farm, heavy with dust, dry grass, and the faint sour smell from the old cattle lot after years without rain enough to wash it clean. The public preview started at 10. By 9:30, cars and pickups were already lining the road. Some belonged to neighbors who remembered when the farm had cattle and wheat. Some belonged to investors who looked at land the way hawks look at field mice. Graham Pike's white auction truck parked beside the barn, and 2 workers set up folding tables with bid packets, bottled water, and glossy flyers. I saw the flyer before anyone handed me one. Callaway Farm, 80 acres, distressed, dry ground development or storage potential. Dry ground. Again. May arrived just as I was standing there staring at those words. She stepped out of her car in dark jeans and a blue blouse, hair pulled back, eyes already scanning my face for damage. Where's the well report, she asked. Not hello, not how are you. May loved with action first. In the house. And the tester? Supposed to be here by noon. She looked toward the road. Supposed to be is doing a lot of work. I almost smiled. Then Graham's voice rolled across the yard. Folks, feel free to walk the perimeter. You'll see what we're offering is mostly open land, limited improvements, and a farmstead that's seen better days. Seen better days. That phrase made the barn seem to sag lower. A couple from Texas walked past the milk shed without noticing the covered well. Landon Voss did notice me watching it. He came over with his sunglasses tucked in his shirt collar and a bottle of water in his hand. Ruth, he said, you're still putting yourself through this. May stepped beside me. And you are. Landon Voss, interested buyer. Funny, you sound more like an interested discount. His smile thinned. Graham joined us then, hat bright in the sun. Mrs. Callaway, I need to be clear. If you're planning to make claims about water, they need documentation. We can't have bidders misled. I have county records, old records, and a water tester coming. He glanced toward the milk shed. That well hasn't served production in years. No one asked it to. A small group had gathered now. I could feel eyes on me, the old familiar pressure of being watched while trying not to shake. Graham lifted his voice just enough for them to hear. Folks, we'll note there's an old well on site, but until proven otherwise, it should be considered non-productive and potentially a liability. A man near the bid table chuckled, dry hole with a view. Landon smiled into his water bottle. May reached for my hand under the table edge and squeezed once. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I looked toward the road, waiting for a testing truck that had not yet arrived. Behind the milk shed, the old well sat covered and silent, like truth with a clock running out. The water tester was late. At noon, the yard shimmered under heat so thick it bent the edges of the barn. Graham Pike kept glancing at his watch with the small satisfaction of a man watching someone else's proof miss its appointment. By 12:30, several preview visitors had drifted back to the bid table. Landon Voss stood with two men in polo shirts, pointing toward the road frontage and drawing invisible rectangles in the air. May called the testing company twice. The second time, she turned away before speaking, which told me the answer was not good. Truck broke down outside Atoka, she said when she came back. They're sending another tech, but they don't know when. Graham heard enough. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his confidence. Mrs. Calloway, this is exactly why I warned you. Unverified water claims can damage bidder trust. Then don't make claims. Let me show records. Old paperwork won't change a sale. May folded her arms. It might change who's trying to steal one. Graham's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, Landon walked over with that easy developer smile. Ruth, you're making this harder on yourself. Even if that well has water, restoring it for agricultural use would cost money you don't have. He did not say that last part loudly. He did not need to. I felt it anyway. The truth was, I had $63 in my purse, a checking account that looked tired, and a bank officer who had stopped calling me Mrs. Calloway and started calling me Ruth Ann in the tone people use before bad news. May looked ready to speak, but I touched her wrist. Come with me, I said. I walked to the house before courage could leak out of me. In the pantry, behind the peach jars, I took down Daddy's green ledger and the certified county copies. Then I reached for an old tobacco tin on the top shelf. Inside were well tokens. Not official tokens, just flat metal tags Daddy had stamped himself, each tied to a length of faded cotton string. He used to lower them with a weighted line to measure depth before fancy gauges were common. One tag still read, 1965, drought 28 feet of water. My fingers closed around it. For a second, the pantry smelled like sorghum, dust, and my father's work shirt. May stood in the doorway. You okay? No, I said, but I'm done acting like being ashamed is the same as being wrong. We went back outside. A small crowd had gathered near the milk shed because Graham had started talking about non-productive improvements. I walked past him, past Landon, past the folding table, and set Daddy's ledger on the old well cover. The wood was gray and warped. Johnson grass brushed my skirt. My father measured this well through 3 droughts, I said. Graham exhaled. Mrs. Calloway. No. You've had your microphone all morning. That stopped him. I lifted the cover. Cool air rose from the dark stone mouth of the well. And for the first time that day, nobody laughed. Cool air kept rising from the well like the ground had been holding its breath. Fnaiknt. People stepped closer, but not too close. Old wells make even confident men cautious. The stone ring was uneven, built by hands instead of machines, with moss tucked in the shaded cracks and one iron hook still set into the side where Daddy used to hang the pulley. May opened the green ledger on the well cover. June. 1965, she read, water at 28 feet during severe drought. Clear after settling. Pump leather replaced. Graham Pike kept his hat on, but his face had changed. Not belief, not yet. Calculation. Historic notes are interesting, he said. but they don't establish current productivity. You wanted documentation, May said. Now documentation is interesting. Landon gave a short laugh. It's still a hole in the ground. That was when Mr. Henry Salas, who had farmed north of us for 40 years, stepped forward from the shade of the barn. Amos Calloway's well-kept 3 families watered in 80, he said. I filled tanks here myself when our pump failed. Graham looked irritated now. Public memory was harder to dismiss than mine alone. Still, he lifted his microphone. Folks, let's avoid speculation. Until testing is complete, this does not affect the published terms. A few bidders nodded. Others looked at the well differently. That small change made Landon's smile disappear. I tied Daddy's 1965 metal tag to a rope and lowered the weighted line into the well. The rope hissed softly over the stone edge. Down it went, foot by foot. My fingers counting knots my father had tied decades before. 10, 20, 25. Then a sound came up from the dark. A small, clean plunk. No one spoke. I held the rope still. May whispered, "Water." Graham's mouth tightened. Surface seepage can collect in old wells. Then it's polite seepage, Henry said, being that deep. A nervous laugh moved through the crowd. I pulled the line back up slowly. The weight emerged first, dripping clear water that flashed in the sun. Then the metal tag, wet and bright against my palm. For one fragile second, hope rose too fast. Then Graham stepped in. Again, quantity matters. A little standing water doesn't change land value. He was right enough to hurt. That was the temporary failure. The well was not dry, but it still had not proven what I needed it to prove. Landon seized the moment. Ruth, this is exactly why serious buyers discount unverified claims. You're turning a necessary sale into a sideshow. The word sideshow landed hard. I looked at the crowd, at the barn, at the bid packets labeled dry acreage. Shame tried to pull the cover back over everything. Then May touched the wet tag in my hand. Mom, she said quietly, don't fold now. A truck engine sounded from the road. White van, blue letters. Caddo water testing and pump service. The driver stepped out carrying a tool case and a coil of tubing. Calloway, well, he asked. For the first time that day, I saw Graham Pike stop smiling completely. The tester's name was Owen Crutchfield, and he looked like every well man my father ever trusted. Lean, sun-browned, quiet, with a gray beard clipped short and a shirt pocket full of pens. He did not waste time introducing himself twice. He set his tool case on the ground, looked into the stone well, then looked at the crowd. Who's responsible for the site? I am, I said. He nodded. Then I talked to you. That alone changed the air. Graham Pike stepped forward. Mr. Crutchfield, this is an active auction preview, so we'll need any findings framed appropriately. Owen blinked at him. I frame pictures. I test wells. Henry Salas laughed once, loud and grateful. Owen lowered a weighted tape, checked static water level, noted the diameter, then threaded tubing down the shaft for a draw test. May held the county report open beside him. I held Daddy's ledger, though my hands had steadied now. The pump hummed to life from his portable rig. At first, the hose spat air. Landon's face relaxed. Then came a brown cough of water. Then another. Then a steady stream poured into a white testing bucket, muddy at first, clearing as it ran. The sound of it hit the bottom of that bucket like coins dropping into a church plate. People moved closer. Graham did not. Owen checked his watch. We'll run it a bit. For 10 minutes, the old well held. For 20, it held better. Owen took a sample vial, held it to the light, and made notes without drama. That was almost the worst part for men like Graham and Landon. No miracle music, no speech, just numbers refusing to cooperate with their story. Finally, Owen turned to me. Preliminary draw is stronger than I expected for a hand-dug well this age. Not enough for a large commercial irrigation claim without more testing, but reliable domestic and small agricultural use. Yes, ma'am. Based on what I'm seeing, this is not a dead well. The words passed through the crowd in a low wave. Not a dead well. Graham's fingers tightened around his microphone. Landon stepped in. Preliminary doesn't mean certified. Nope, Owen said. That's why I said preliminary. But it doesn't justify changing auction terms. Owen looked at him the way a tired mechanic looks at a man explaining an engine from a brochure. I'm not auctioning land. I'm telling the owner her well has water. That was when I saw Graham's private doubt. His eyes went to the flyer on the bid table. Dry acreage. Then to the bucket filling beside the milk shed. Then to Landon, whose mouth had gone flat. Graham knew, maybe not everything yet, but enough to understand his sale language had become dangerous. May leaned close to me. "Mom," she whispered. They all heard it. I looked at the water running clear into the bucket. For years, I had thought shame was something I carried alone. But standing there, with my daughter beside me and my father's ledger open in the sun, I realized shame loses weight when truth gets witnesses. Graham Pike asked for 20 minutes to review the situation. Nobody moved far. Buyers lingered by the bid table, pretending to study packets they had already read. Neighbors stood under the thin shade of the barn, speaking low. Owen Crutchfield kept the pump running another 5 minutes, then shut it down and labeled the water samples with the slow care of a man who knew labels could outlive arguments. Landon Voss pulled Graham aside near the auction truck. They thought they were speaking quietly. They were not. You cannot change the sale narrative now, Landon said. People came here for distressed acreage. Graham kept his eyes on the bucket of clear water. People came here to bid on the property being offered. Dry property. Graham's jaw worked. That was the moment his private doubt stepped closer to daylight. Not morality yet. Liability. Reputation. The fear of being recorded, saying dead land while water ran 10 yards away. May stood beside me with her arms crossed. He's scared, she whispered. So am I. Good means you're awake. At 1 o'clock, Graham climbed onto the flatbed trailer. The microphone squealed once, sharp enough to make everyone wince. He cleared his throat and removed his white hat, which I had never seen him do all morning. Folks, he said, before we proceed, Pike Land and Auction needs to amend the property description. Landon's face hardened. Graham looked toward me, then toward the milk shed. This farm was advertised as distressed dry acreage. That description was incomplete. Documentation has been presented showing a registered agricultural domestic well on site, along with preliminary testing indicating current water availability. A murmur moved through the bidders. One man in a seed company cap raised his hand. Is the well certified for production? Owen answered from the ground. Preliminary draw supports domestic and small agricultural use. Full certification pending lab and extended yield testing. The man nodded. That's more than dry. Another bidder, a woman with a horse trailer parked by the road, stepped closer. Can the sale be delayed until the report's final? Graham hesitated. Landon spoke before him. The sale terms are posted. Delaying now would be irregular. May snapped. So was calling a wet well dry. A few people turned toward her. She did not blink. Graham lifted one hand. We will offer bidders the option to withdraw registered bids after this amendment. The auction will proceed, but the well disclosure is now part of the record. That changed everything. The opening bid Landon expected to control came and went in less than a minute. A cattleman from Durant bid first. The woman with the horse trailer bid next. Then a family from 2 counties over asked whether the acreage could support rotational grazing with supplemental water. Landon raised his card once, then twice, each time faster, less amused. The number climbed past what he had offered me privately, then past the tax debt, then past the banknote. My knees weakened, and May put one hand at my back. Graham's chant changed as the bids rose. His voice still moved fast, but the mockery was gone. At the edge of the milk shed, the old well stood open, dark and quiet again. It had said all it needed to say. In the end, I did not sell Callaway Farm that day. That surprised people more than the well. The highest bid came from the woman with the horse trailer, and it was fair, more than fair, enough to pay the taxes, satisfy the bank, fix the barn roof, and leave me with something besides panic. Graham Pike looked at me from the flatbed, microphone lowered, waiting for my nod. Landon Voss stood near his SUV with his arms crossed, no longer smiling. May leaned close. "Mom," she whispered, "you can say no." That was the gift she gave me. Not advice, permission. I looked across the yard, the barn, the milk shed, the old well, the red dirt road where my father used to walk home at dusk with his hat in one hand. I thought of Ben repairing fence after dark, cussing softly at Staples. I thought of all the years I had mistaken keeping quiet for keeping strong. Then I stepped forward. I'm not accepting the full farm bid. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Graham blinked once. "Mrs. Callaway, the reserve allows you to reject, but you understand." "I understand." My voice shook, but it held. "I will offer a long-term lease on the North 20 for grazing, with water access terms reviewed after final testing. The rest of the farm stays with me." Nobody spoke for a second. Then the cattleman from Durant raised his hand. "I'd discuss that." The woman with the horse trailer nodded too. So would I. That was how the auction ended, not with a gavel stealing my land, but with 3 chairs pulled under the shade of the barn and May making notes on the back of a bid packet. Graham came over before he left. He held his hat in both hands. "Mrs. Callaway," he said, "I owe you an apology. I called your farm dead because I trusted a surface description and didn't look for what was still working underneath. I waited." He swallowed. "And I said it in front of people who were ready to believe it. That was better, specific enough to count. Next time," I said, "look before you bury something." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." By fall, the North 20 was leased to the Durant cattlemen. The tax bill was paid. The bank stopped sending envelopes that made my stomach clench. Owen's final report confirmed the well-needed repairs, not miracles. New pump parts cost more than I liked and less than losing everything. May came down 2 Saturdays a month after that. Sometimes we worked. Sometimes we argued. Sometimes we sat by the old well and said nothing at all. The farm was not saved forever. Land never is. It has to be chosen again and again by whoever is left to listen. And some mornings, when I lift the well cover and cool air rises from the dark, I hear my father's voice as clear as bucket water. Water talks soft. So do the things worth keeping.